Little Plum. Chapter 2. The house next door was made new. And how new, said Belinda. All that autumn, other boards appeared. Mason and Perry Limited, builders. Goss and Gom, central heating. Palmer Green Limited, electrical engineers. Men swarmed in and over the house from the garden to the roof, and the whole road was filled with the sound of knocking and hammering. A concrete mixer turned. Rubble and old wood pulled out fireplaces, pipes, a cooking stove, and cisterns were dumped on the lawn. Trucks came and went. The gas people arrived, and a telephone van, and the pavement was taken up. Soon the ilex was covered with dust, and more dust, with smells and noise, came over the hedge into the Felds house. Mother said it was almost unbearable. But Belinda loved it. She and Nona watched all day, and every day they had something new to report. It gets interestinger and interestinger, said Belinda. A fireplace with a white mantel went in. Marble, Nona told Belinda. The floors were sanded with a machine that made the worst noise and dust of all. Then they were repolished. Doors and windows, skirtings and banisters were painted white. The house next door has 2 staircases, said Belinda. She went in and out and had made friends with the workmen, but Nona was too shy. She only watched. Then other new boards appeared. Martin Moresby, decorators, and Hall, Jones, and Hall, perfect landscape gardeners. Belinda was not allowed in anymore. Pale, satined wallpapers went up. New carpets were laid in every room and on the stairs. It must have cost a fortune, said Belinda. Not a fortune, Anne corrected her, but Belinda nodded her head. I heard the men say so. Belinda might not be able to go in, but she could still look and listen. Saucers and pitchers, Father called Belinda's eyes and ears. The landscape gardeners tidied the garden, pruned, cleared, weeded, made new paved walks where the old brick paths had been, and dug new flower beds. The lawns were dug up too, smoothed and turfed and rolled, their edges trimmed. The roses round the windows were cut back, and the flower beds were filled with new plants bearing labels with strange-sounding names. Cystisus albus? Asked Belinda. Viburnum sterile? Nona wrote them down and took them to her friend, old Mr. Twilfit, who kept the bookshop. Nona was often in and out of the bookshop, and sometimes, too, she took Miss Happiness and Miss Flower to visit Mr. Twilfit. You see, he helped to establish them, she said. He had lent her books on Japan so that she could learn to play with them properly. He had helped design the doll's house, and he had given me all sorts of things, said Nona. He was a surprising friend for Nona, who was a timid child. She was brought up in India away from people, and that made her shy, Belinda often explained. Most children were afraid of Mr. Twilfit. He had a bad temper, a habit of roaring in his deep voice, and his eyebrows looked ferocious. Gray caterpillars, Belinda called them. Even she was quiet and very respectful. Mr. Twilfit must be very wise with all those books, she said. Silly, he doesn't read them, said Tom. He sells them. He reads a lot of them, said Nona, and Belinda's right. He is wise, the wisest man I know. When there was anything Nona wanted to know, she always went and asked Mr. Twilfit. Cistus albus, he said now. That's a pearly white broom. Viburnum sterile? That's a snowball tree. Why couldn't they say so? Asked Belinda. Even the garage was made new, big enough for 3 cars, and was given doors that opened by themselves if you pressed a button, which seemed magical to Belinda. The garage had a new glass roof, too, over its courtyard. That's for the chauffeur to wash the cars under when it rains, said Tom. Will they have a chauffeur? Asked Belinda, impressed. Sure to, and I expect he will live in the flat over the garage. It's being made new, too, said Tom. The Tiffany Joneses, it seemed, left nothing to chance. Burglar alarms were fitted to all the doors and the downstairs windows. Well, they probably have valuable things, said Anne. Then the new fire escapes with curly iron steps were built each side of the house. The one on the fell side was close beside the ilex tree, almost touched by its branches. I hope they won't ask us to lop it, said Anne. They will probably like the way it screens their garden from us, said Mother. At last, just as Christmas time, the house next door was ready, spick and span, in fact, so spick and span it made one catch one's breath. Just imagine if you left finger marks on that white paint, said Anne. If you brought in a bit of mud on those floors, said Tom, while Mother said she would hardly dare to cook in the white-tiled blue and white kitchen. The garden, too, was uncomfortably tidy. Suppose a ball went into one of those shrubs, said Tom. If you fell off your scooter into one of the beds, said Belinda, or rode your bicycle on the paths and went to the new grass, you couldn't ride your bicycle in that garden, said Nona, or scoot. I don't think there can be any children, said Belinda. But when 2 days after Christmas the furniture arrived, Belinda and Nona saw what was unmistakably children's furniture. And what beautiful furniture it was. There was a pale blue bed with poles, like a small four-poster, with a pale blue dressing table, chest of drawers, and chairs to match. There was furniture, too, for a sitting room, a school desk, a blackboard, small armchairs, bookcases, and delivered in a special van, a miniature white piano. There were toys, a big dollhouse, doll's beds, a doll's perambulator, almost as large as a real one, a cooking stove, a pale blue bicycle, and all of them were obviously for a girl. Tom groaned. We have enough girls already. I think, said Belinda, there must be 4 or 5. There are so many toys. But there's only one bed, said Nona. To their great excitement, all these were carried into the 2 rooms that were opposite Nona and Belinda's bedroom. That's where the girl is going to sleep and play, said Belinda. What fun, we shall be able to watch her and wave to her. If she will wave to us, said Nona, but such a doubt never entered Belinda's head. Not long after the furniture, a lady and gentleman arrived. Is it a Rolls Royce? Whispered Belinda. A phantom silver cloud, too, said Tom, and brand new. It was gray and black with dark gray leather. A gentleman was driving with a lady beside him, and a chauffeur in a gray uniform was sitting behind. The big car stopped at the gate. The chauffeur sprang out to open the door, but the gentleman was already out, and, Is that the father? Whispered Belinda. He doesn't look like a father. He was certainly not like any of the fathers she had ever seen. He was young, tall, thin, pale, and far more elegant, said Nona. She and Belinda, little girls as they were, could see he was beautifully dressed. I never thought of a man's clothes being beautiful before, said Nona afterwards. His trousers had edges, whispered Belinda. She meant their creases were sharply pressed. His shirt seemed to be cream-colored silk. His shoes shone. His dark overcoat looked warm and rich, and Nona thought, with a pang, of her uncle's raincoat, his office suit, his old tweed coat, and flannels. Mr. Tiffany Jones was wearing what Belinda called a city hat, from seeing men who wore them catching the morning train to London. It's a bowler hat, said Nona. The lady looked older than he, tall too, but large, in a large fur coat, high-heeled fur boots, and a red velvet hat. Her face was red too. Red and white, said Belinda. Hush, that's rouge and powder, said Nona. Does she think it looks nice? Asked Belinda. The lady had a string of pearls, a diamond watch over her glove. Belinda and Nona saw it sparkle as she lifted her hand, and I can smell her from here. Shh, that's her scent, said Nona. After the Rolls Royce came another smaller car, and in it were 2 women who wore white overalls under their coats. It was driven by a man who soon afterwards appeared in a striped jacket. A butler, said Nona, but Mother said he was more likely to be a houseman. The children could see them through the window, hurrying about, moving furniture, carrying things, while the lady stood in the middle of each room in turn, ordering everyone about. The gentleman stayed out in the garden, walking about the lawns, looking at the flower bed, as if he did not like them very much. Every now and again he read one of the labels and seemed as surprised as Nona and Belinda had been at their names. He doesn't know what they are either, said Belinda. He heard Belinda's loud voice and looked up, saw them behind the hedge, and smiled. Even to the children it seemed a sad and absent-minded smile. And, I wonder what's the matter with him, thought Nona. The front door opened. Harold! Harold! The lady called in an imperious voice that was louder even than Belinda's. Harold, you might come and help. My dear Agnes, I thought I should only be in the way. It's your house, said the lady. Then it isn't hers? Isn't she Mrs. Tiffany Jones? Asked Belinda. It seemed that she was not. The new cook had made friends with Mrs. Bodger, and soon the Fellses knew all about the Tiffany Joneses. With Mrs. Bodger and Belinda, who could help it, as Father said? The real Mrs. Tiffany Jones, it seemed, was in hospital because 2 years ago she had caught polio. Polio, that's the illness when you can't move, isn't it? Asked Belinda. She tried to imagine what that would be like. It would be terrible, said Belinda, awed. Polio often does paralyze, said Mother. How very, very sad. She got it in London, Belinda reported, and Mrs. Tiffany Jones had to come and look after the house there and look after the girls. Mrs. Bodger had said there was one little girl. Look after her, said Belinda, because Mr. often goes traveling. But now Mrs. Tiffany Jones has been sent to, Belinda could not remember the name and said, to a famous hospital here. Of course, Stoke Mandeville, said Mother, which was not far from Top Meadow. That's where they teach hurt people to move again, walk and swim and use wheelchairs. Perhaps it means she is getting better. He bought the house next door just to be near to her, this great big house, said Belinda. Miss Tiffany Jones has come here too and will look after it. She's his sister, his much older sister. She used to look after him when he was a little boy. That's why he can't say boo to her. Belinda, you are not to repeat gossip, said Mother. It isn't gossip. He can't, said Belinda. Their cook told Mrs. Bodger. Then, Miss Tiffany Jones is the little girl's aunt, said Nona. I don't think I would like her for my aunt. She's a proper old cat, said Belinda. Belinda! Mother was horrified. But she is. Cook told Mrs. Bodger so. The cook's name was Mrs. Mount. The other maid was Eileen. The houseman was called Selwyn. And you don't call him Mr., said Belinda. The chauffeur was Benson. You don't call him Mr. either. They were all complete except for the little girl. Then, on a bitter January day, the rolls drew up at the next-door gate, and out got a girl and a woman. Belinda and Nona, who were just coming back from the shops, clutched one another. The girl walking up the path looked about the same age as Nona. She was wearing a green velvet coat and hat, white boots, fur-topped, and a white fur tippet, white gloves, and a white shawl wound round her neck and over her mouth. As well as the tippet, said Belinda. The girl was as pale as Mr. Tiffany Jones, and down her back hung a long fall of fair hair. It gave her the look of being drowned, thought Nona. She and Belinda looked to where the woman was taking a rug and parcels from the chauffeur. She was a big, solid-looking woman with a big face and iron gray hair. She was dressed in an iron gray coat and hat. She looks iron all over, said Nona. Is she a nurse? Asked Belinda in a whisper. That girl's too old to have a nurse. That must be a governess. She doesn't look like a governess, said Nona uncertainly. Perhaps she's a kind of maid. Miss Tiffany Jones had come out on the steps to meet them. Come in, come along, she called in her imperious voice. Hurry up, Matson, she called to the woman. As with Selwyn and Benson, Miss Tiffany Jones did not say Mrs. or Miss. It seemed rude to Belinda to call people by their surnames, but come along, Matson, hurry up out of the cold, called Miss Tiffany Jones. They are coming as fast as they can, murmured Belinda. She and Nona had gone into their own garden and were looking through the hedge. Selwyn came out to carry the suitcases. Welcome home, Miss Jem, he said, as respectfully as if he were talking to a grown-up. Jem, that's a boy's name, said Belinda. Not J-E-M, silly. G-E-M, said Tom, who had come up behind them. Never heard of it, said Belinda, as if she had heard of everything. It certainly goes well with Tiffany, said Mr. Twilfit when he heard of it. Nona and Belinda had gone down to the bookshop to tell him that Jem had arrived. Tiffany's, he explained to them, was a famous jeweler's and goldsmith in New York. Does it belong to Jem's father? Asked Belinda, her eyes round. Hardly probable, said Mr. Twilfit. Might be some connection, though. I think Jem is a pretty name, said Nona. Jem Tiffany Jones. It's the richest name I ever heard, said Belinda. Belinda, said Mother a day or two later. Belinda, you are not to go next door. Oh, Mother, why not? Mr. Tiffany Jones smiles at us. I know, said Mother, but Miss Tiffany Jones doesn't. Mother had spoken to Miss Tiffany Jones when she met her in the road. I hope you're going to like living in Top Meadow. After London? Miss Tiffany Jones gave a queer little laugh that did not sound amused. Like living in a suburb and not even a London suburb? But Top Meadow's a lovely place, said Belinda. Miss Tiffany Jones did not speak to Mother again, nor nod to any of them or smile, and you are not to go next door, said Mother to Belinda. Which means not hanging round the gate, said Anne, and Belinda blushed. I want to make friends, said Belinda. Belinda was friends with everyone. With the shop people, the postman, the laundryman, the vicar, with Sir William Mortimer, who was Top Meadow's Member of Parliament, and with the old chestnut seller who had his stand in the winter at the corner of the road. Nona had only 3 friends, and she had made them through Miss Happiness and Miss Flower. Nona was friends with Melly, the girl she sat next to at school, Miss Lane, who taught there, and Mr. Twilfit. These were Nona's friends, but to Belinda everyone was a friend, and it was an astonishing idea to her for the Fells not to make friends at once with the Tiffany Joneses. But Mother was quite firm. You are not to go next door, Belinda. What, never? Asked Belinda. Not unless you are asked, said Mother. But suppose they never ask me? Then you can never go, said Tom. End of chapter 2.